Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Nguyen. This is a video lecture on how to cite sources and document sources according to MLA style. I have opened up here in the screen my MLA PowerPoint. You can also find this PowerPoint in Module 2, and you are strongly encouraged, you have to download and open this PowerPoint to view on your own after this lecture as needed. And this PowerPoint should also be viewed in conjunction to Chapter 28 in your textbook. All right, so this PowerPoint and Chapter 8 of your textbook will be indispensable sources for your persuasive essay, your upcoming research paper, as well as the MLA style quiz that you have coming up. Okay, so please don't keep that in mind. In this lecture, I'm just going to go over this PowerPoint, and I will be giving you all information about MLA style and just some important notes or details to keep in mind as you try to conform to MLA style whenever you use information from outside sources. Okay, so before we begin with the first slide of relevant information, so by the time that you're viewing this video lecture, and considering and reading about MLA style, you should have already read chapters 24 and 25 in your textbook for the research in your textbook. And from those chapters, you should know, if you read them all of the pages in both chapters thoroughly, you should know that not all sources out there are equal, right? We're all used to the internet and Google, and search engines like Google and the World Wide Web has become an everyday part of our life, and we use the internet for both informal and formal research in our everyday life or in our academic life. And it's a great source to have. It is a great tool to have because it meets our need for immediate gratifications, for example. But when it comes to academic research, you do need to apply a measure of discipline and rigor. Okay, and what that means is that not all sources that are available on the World Wide Web are equal in content, reliability, or trustworthiness, or even in depth of information. So you all have to be critical about the sources that you're looking at. And by critical, I mean you all should know how to interpret your sources. You should know how to evaluate your sources. You should know, based on those chapters that you've read, what information to consider as you evaluate your sources, in terms of, is this a good source to use? Is this an appropriate source to use for my paper? How can I tell that this source is good and this source will provide convincing secondary support for my paper, or things like that? Is by look at where it's published, how it's published, and also the author. Those are some general things that you can consider as you try to determine if a source you're looking at is worthy of an academic subject or an academic reference. Okay, and also in those chapters that you've read, well, I have my textbook here. Give me just one sec. I'm trying to locate this chart on one of those pages that ranks the different types of research sources according to its depth and rigor and reliability and trustworthy and all of that. Maybe I should have thought about that before I start this, but I should be getting there soon enough. I don't think it's in chapter 24. It's probably in chapter 20. I mean, it's not in chapter 25. It's probably in chapter 24. Give me just one sec here. Okay, yes, I found it. It is in chapter 24 on page 413. All right. After you view this video, and before you begin conducting your research for the persuasive essay, okay, you should look in chapter 24 again on page 413. Most of page 413 has this, what do you call it? This table that lists or that ranks the different types of sources that are out there, and they rank them according to the criteria of depth, of the source's depth, reliability, credibility, and trustworthiness, and all of those, criteria that you should apply to all of the sources that you're consulting. All right. So, these the type of sources that are considered the deepest, most reliable, most credible and most useful for academic purposes are, of course, your scholarly books and your scholarly articles, right? Those are given because and they are considered the deepest, most reliable for academic uses. Because the authors of scholarly books and scholarly articles are academics, are academics or professors or researchers, intimately entrenched in the academic communities of their specific subject, and so they are experts, on the on a specific subject, and they are the people who continually who continually make contributions to their field of study or to the field of research, or to the field of research and so forth. So that's why they are the most reliable. So as you move down, right, your trade books and your articles are next in line in terms of the depth and reliability. And also this goes back to the author, or the kind of to the reputation of the author, and the kind of reputation that they have, and the expert level of their knowledge, right? Remember, on your plagiarism quiz, one of the questions is about, author's credibility, and it all goes back to that. Author's credibility is important. And so trade books and articles are written by experts for the general public, but for the educated general audience of the public. And some popular publications that are reliable are the Atlantic magazine, your Scientific American magazine, your Nature, Orion, and so forth. And so just go through the list, and see the source, and see which of these type of sources, which of these type of sources describe the kinds of sources that you're looking at, right? And kind of self-evaluate if you should continue to consider those sources based on where they rank in this table. Okay? All right, and I think that's all I have to say about that. So, of course, the general rule here is, if you look down at the bottom of the table, right, the most unreliable and shallow, not credible sources are your unregulated web material, and these are personal sites, joke sites, chat rooms, special interest sites, blah blah blah. So these are, unregulated, unscreened. Anybody, if they have the time or the inclination to, can create any kind of sources like this that are unregulated. So you have to be careful about referencing those, because referencing these kind of sources will not strengthen your argument. What they'll do is they'll just, bring down the credibility of your own essay, because, of the lack of credibility of the sources that you use. So they can affect your argument, the kind of sources that you use. So keep that in mind for your research paper and for the persuasive essay. All right. So as you're researching, either physically in the library or online, and I'm sure that most of you will be conducting your research online, you should be researching only in Galileo. Galileo contains both scholarly and popular sources. And there are many advantages to researching on Galileo as opposed on the World Wide Web. Galileo is Georgia's virtual library. It contains many databases, many types of sources, primary, secondary, and so forth. And some of the advantages of researching on Galileo, unlike researching on Google, um, is that you don't is that the information or the sources that you're taken to are are screened and are regulated, right? Or they've gone through a process of screened I'm sorry, a process of screening before they were published, right? So it kind of protects you. Researching on Galileo kind of protects you against this unregulated that is the norm of the World Wide Web content. Some of them, and most of them anyway. Okay, so and if you're researching on Galileo on campus at the school, you won't have to know the password. Um, but Galileo is a subscription only kind of virtual library. So if you're researching outside of the campus, off campus, you'll need our institution password. And our institution's password for this semester, it changes every semester, but for this semester, um, so for the password of this semester, you need to read my course announcement because it is listed there. All right, and just keep in mind that every semester Galileo's password changes. Okay, all right. So what was I going with that? Okay, so depending on what subject or what essay you're working on, um, there are um, there are minimum and maximum limits uh, imposed on the number of sources that you can use, depending on which assignment we're talking about. So read, um, you know, the information and direction for each assignment. And as you're researching, it is very important that you have a way to keep track of your notes or of your sources, what information come from what sources. So that when it's time for you to draft and to integrate some of these outside sources into your own paper, you won't have to do a lot of backtracking to figure out where what comes from, so that you can attribute the proper credit to your sources. Okay, so it's going to effective note keeping and keeping track of your sources as you go along is going to, in the end, save you a lot of time, right? So what I used to do as a student when I was conducting research is of course, I would do the normal highlighting and printing up articles and highlighting and making notes in the margin, or keeping an annotated bibliography, which is pretty much a bibliography of all of your sources with notes to accompany each of the source, to remind you of what each source is about. You don't have to do that, but make sure that you're highlighting, or writing on the margin if you print your sources. Now, if you won't be printing your sources, you can certainly download your sources and save them to a folder and name your folder a specific name that will remind you that these sources are for this class, for this project. Or you can also, open up a Microsoft Word document and kind of summarize or paraphrase in your own words the kind of details that you want to use from each source. And at the end of your summary, make sure that you document where it comes from by stating the source's title and author, so that when you look at it, you can easily, find, that same source again. Or you can quote, and if you're quoting, of course, make sure you use quotation marks, and at the end of the quote, make sure in parentheses, you create some kind of shorthand that will remind you of where that quotation comes from. So these are just some, or you can use flashcards to jot down notes or details from from sources that you think you might want to use in your own paper as well. Okay, so these are just some strategies for keeping track of your sources. And like I say, if you do this and you do this efficiently, it will become like second nature to you when it comes to researching, and in the end it is going to save you a lot of time. All right, so I know that was a long digression from the topic at hand, and I know that the purpose of this video is to talk about MLA style, but what I just talked about in terms of researching and researching methods are intimately tied to our MLA discussion, believe it or not, because you know you don't get to this stage about citation and documentation until you've done all of your researching and you've gathered all um, uh, appropriate, effective, good sources, deep, reliable sources before you can move on to this stage of citing and documenting according to MLA style. So it is connected, and I just wanted to give you tips and suggestions and just reminders overall about this, about the process of researching. All right, so let's say that you've done your research, you have your, I don't know, however number of sources that you need to have. You've read them all at least twice. You've highlighted, you've noted, you've recorded, whatever it is that you do. Certain instances, details, or passages from each of the sources that you think you might want to use in your essay. So now you're ready for the next stage, and the next stage is about drafting your essay, right? Developing your argument and supporting your argument, and a part of your supporting I guess, strategies could be secondary sources, bringing into your essay secondary support from sources that support what you're saying to lend your argument a further needed strength. Okay? All right, so how do you do that? How do you incorporate or integrate outside sources into your own paper in an appropriate way? Right? And how and what style should you use? Well, there are a number of academic styles that different disciplines use. In the humanities, the most commonly used academic style for referencing or citing and documenting sources is the MLA style, and MLA stands for Modern Language Association. It is the style that is almost ubiquitously used in all English departments or programs across the country. Now, there are some programs or some, English communities that use a different style called Chicago style, but it is not as common as the MLA. Okay, so like I said, the MLA is the chosen academic style for citing and documenting sources in the English discipline. All right. So first, before we can talk about the style, specifically what are some of the general guidelines for using this style, we need to be able to differentiate. Let me go back to the previous slide. We need to understand the terms that are essential to our discussion and understanding of MLA guidelines. Okay, when it comes to using outside sources, and these terms are citation and documentation. Okay, so citation in MLA style simply means to refer to a source. So you cite a source in your essay when you want to use that source's information. Okay, so citing a source in your essay simply means using a source's information in your essay for supporting purposes. So that's what citing means. It's another word for, I guess, referencing a source. Now, documentation means well, documenting a source, showing where a source that you've cited in your essay come from by giving all of the publication details such as the title, the author, where it was published, when it was published, and all of that stuff. And the purpose of documenting sources is really, of course, to make you look good, right, and to make you to enhance your credibility, right, to show that you are a responsible and ethic writer who participate in certain discourses, but who also know the rules and conventions of that govern that conversation. And one of the most important rules that govern an academic conversation or academic discourse is how to cite and document sources properly. Okay. All right, so when you are citing a source in your essay, it is called in-text citation, right? In-text is a given. In-text means inside your text, and citation, well, we've just said what it means, all right? So the next question that we need to address or to pretty much discuss is, how do you cite a source? What are the different ways that you can cite a source, that you can refer to a source, or that you can use, or that you can represent a source's information in your essay, right? And there are pretty much two basic ways that you can cite a source in your essay. You can cite a source in your own words, or you can cite a source in the source's own words. Okay? What that means is that, well, when you're citing a source's information in your own words, you are pretty much paraphrasing or summarizing the ideas from the source that you want to use in your own paper, in your own words. When you're citing a source in the source's own words, you're pretty much using the source's own words when it discusses a certain information that you want to use. And of course, when you're citing a source in the source's own words, you have to use quotation marks. That is a given, and that cannot be dispensed with. You know, there's no way around it. You've got to use quotation marks. Without quotation marks, you can run the risk of plagiarizing intentionally or unintentionally. You know, intention is really not, it's really not a concern here when it comes to plagiarism, right? You cannot say, oh, I didn't mean to plagiarize. Either you plagiarized or you didn't. If you didn't mean to, then you need to be more careful the next time, but you are responsible for everything you put in your paper for submission, right? And you've been taught to submit your work through the process of editing and proofreading before you turn it in for a grade. So if you choose to forego that process, then some of the consequences could be unintentional plagiarism, which you really can't blame anyone for but yourself. Okay, so like I said, intention does not matter in the end. Okay, and of course you can't really say that, oh, I didn't know how to cite that. Well, I've pointed you to the chapter that you need to read. I'm giving you a lecture on how to do this, so there's really no excuse about not knowing how to do something. It's not the same thing as saying that I won't believe you when you say you didn't know how to do something. I'll probably believe you, but then again, I won't have any sympathy for you because again, the responsibility of not knowing lies with you. The blame lies with you, because yes, it is valid to not know. I mean, it is absolutely okay to not know, but if you've been told or are advised to get to know a concept, to learn a concept, and you're given resources and materials to learn, but if you still choose not to take advantage of those as you're required to, then like I said, the blame lies with you. Okay, so those kind of excuses are not acceptable. All right. So like I said, in MLA, right? There are two ways to represent your source, right? To use sources information in your essay, you can either represent the source by summarizing that idea that you want to use from the source in your own words or in the words of the source. Okay, so when you are citing a source or an idea from a source using your own words or in your own words, you can paraphrase or summary. The only difference between paraphrasing and summarizing is the content or the length. You're paraphrasing a small idea, say in a paragraph of a 40-page article that is a source, but you're summarizing more complex idea, more lengthy idea, or you can also summarize, the entire work. So the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing is really uh, the extensiveness of the ideas that you're using itself, okay? And it does not really indicate any kind of difference in methodology, okay? Now, of course, quotation is what you do when you are citing a source in the source's own words. But please note that all in-text citation, meaning each and every time you borrow a source's idea, or you state a source's idea, or you use a source's idea in your paper, no matter how minor, you have to document the source with a parenthetical citation at the end of each sentence, at the end of each in-text citation. Okay, and you will see what this parenthetical citation or parenthetical documentation looks like. Well, here is what it looks like. Okay, so let's talk about paraphrasing. So like I said, you are paraphrasing a source when you cite a small idea or a minor idea from a source. Okay. Now, the first time that you are using a source in your essay, you should introduce the source. Okay, and you can introduce the source by giving the author's first and last name and or the title of the work. Okay, so an example I have here in the PowerPoint, and there are plenty of examples in your textbook in chapter 28. So you need to look at that chapter as well in conjunction or in addition to this PowerPoint and PowerPoint lecture. All right, so an example of a paraphrasing of a source or of a paraphrase citation of a source that is used for the first time in the essay is, in the article X, Y, and Z, David Smith asserts that the principle of least effort has always influenced the evolution of a language. Okay, so this is a short sentence that paraphrases what Smith say about the evolution of language on page 75 in his article. So this is that parenthetical documentation that I told you all about, that you all need to have each and every time you mention a source, each and every time you cite a source, meaning you use an information from a source. You have to provide a parenthetical citation documenting where you received this, where you got this information from. Now, the basic component of a parenthetical documentation in MLA style is author's last name, like this one, author's last name and page number. And as you can see, there's no punctuation whatsoever. Now, why is there not an author's name in this parentheses, in this parenthetical documentation for this example? Well, the reason that this parenthetical citation does not have the author's last name preceding the page number is because the author's name is already mentioned in the in-text citation itself. Okay, so you don't have to duplicate your information. If your in-text citation does not mention the author, then yes, in the parenthetical citation you will need to provide the author's last name. But if your in-text citation gives the author's last name, then you can forego that need in your parenthetical citation. Okay, and now let's look at this example here that has the author's last name in the parenthetical citation, and let's see what the in-text citation sounds like and why we need the author's last name here. So the example is, soliloquies in Shakespeare plays have more complex functions than merely revealing a character's innermost thought. All right, so this idea about the importance of soliloquies in Shakespeare plays, right, is not the author's own idea. The idea is taken from a source written by Jones, written by an author named Jones. All right, so the writer of this essay is uh, provides, the necessary documentation information in the body of the essay, um, to attribute this idea to its original author. Okay, so like I said, each and every time you're using someone else's idea that is not your own, you need to cite. Now, the author, so the sources is not named here. The authors is not named in this in-text citation, so it makes sense that you provide the author's last name in the parenthetical documentation that tells you where this idea comes from. All right, so that's the difference. All right, so, but you are advised to introduce your source the first time that you are using it. Now, if you are going to use the same source later on in your essay, you do not have to introduce it again. You can simply use the author's last name, right, in your subsequent citations of the same source. So, for example, Smith further explains that the English language lost its original Germanic sound through collective relaxation of arduous Germanic pronunciation. Okay, and of course this idea is explained on page 105 of Smith. Okay, all right, so let's go to the next slide. The next slide is about summarizing your source. This is still citing your source in your own words, but you're summarizing a source when you're summarizing a bigger chunk of an idea or the entire source, as opposed to paraphrasing. Okay, so for example, Stephen Greenblatt's Renaissance self-fashioning examines the emergence of personal identity within the context of religious conflict in Renaissance England. Now, you might ask, well, this is an in-text citation, so why is there no parenthetical citation at the end of this parenthetical citation at the end of this in-text citation? All right. The reason that there's no page number is because this is a summary of the entire book, right? So this idea does not come, so the idea that is expressed in here does not come on any particular page. It is a summary that captures the overall theme or message or main idea of the entire book, of the entire work. Okay, so there is no parenthetical citation giving you the page number because it's not a specific page number, it's the entire work. Now, and also the parenthetical citation is not needed because the author's name is given in the in-text citation in the summary. Now, if the authors were not given in the summary, right, then yes, you would need a parenthetical citation that would contain only the author's last name, which is Greenblatt. Okay, so if the summary begins with Renaissance self-fashion examines the blah blah, then yes, you would have a parenthetical citation after England and before the period, right? And inside the parentheses would appear the last name Greenblatt. But because you're giving his name here already in the summary, the parenthetical citation is not needed at all. Okay, so another example of a summary there, and Greenblatt is mentioned. This idea is articulated on pages 45 to 47 of the work. Greenblatt, his last name is not needed in front of the page number because it's already given in the in-text citation. All right, so those two slides, so we've talked about how to represent sources or use information from sources in your own essay in your own words. Now let's talk about using sources, using information from sources in the source's own words. And of course, this is called quotation. And the discussion on quotation is broken up into two different types of quotation. There are the short quotation and there are the long quotation, and how you format short quotations and long quotations do differ in MLA style. Okay, so we're going to talk first about how to incorporate short quotation in your essay. Short quotation is defined as fewer than 4 lines in your own essay, right? So if you are quoting a source that take up less than 4 lines in your own essay to represent, then the quotation is considered short quotation. So notice we're talking about your own paper, not that of the source. Now the quotation that you're using can still qualify as short if it takes up fewer than 4 lines in your own essay to represent. But if, say, in the original source the quotation takes over 4 lines, then it's not considered short quotation because we're only counting your own paper, not the source, if that makes sense. Okay? Now, before we discuss, you always need to keep in mind, and you should be aware of this from your reading of chapter 26 of the textbook. Okay, you always need to keep in mind that short quotation, that anytime you use quotations in your textbook, you cannot, and the textbook uses this term, you cannot plunk your quotations, right? Meaning that you can't just plug in your quotation and not introduce it and say something about it afterwards. All right, you have to contextualize any quotation that you use in your own essay. Okay, you can't simply drop it into your essay and then move on as if you've done nothing wrong. Okay, that is called plunking quotations. In my own words, I said do not make your quotation stand alone. Okay, always bring it into the fold of your argument. Okay, so anytime you use quotation, you need to contextualize it by perhaps introducing or give some background information for better understanding the quotation, because usually quotations are extracted from the middle of the discussion in the original source. So when you remove it from the original context, you need to recontextualize it for your audience's understanding. Okay, and so you can do that by introducing and giving some very, very brief background information so that your reader know where this quotation fits into your own argument. Okay, and after you've given the quotation, you can't just leave it alone and move on. You need to discuss your quotation in some aspect, right? So your post quotation discussion could be about explain what the quotation means, explain what it highlights, explain its significance. Okay, explain in what light you want your reader to understand the quotation, how they want to perceive it, how they want to understand it, how you want them to understand it, or how you want them to consider it, just anything like that, or just point out how the quotations support your argument in some way. Okay, so those are some of the post citation discussion that you can have about the quotation. Okay, so make sure that you do that for all of your quotations. Okay, so don't plunk your quotation. Always contextualize it, introduce it, background information it, and always discuss it afterward. Okay, after it's given. Just a brief discussion in terms of, the significance of the quotation or how it supports your argument, because you're using quotation. You must have a purpose for using a quotation. You can't just use it just because you want to use it, right? You have to have a purpose. Okay, it has to be meaningful, and it is your job to explain what meaning it has for you, what supporting purpose, how it supports your argument, how supportive it is to your argument. Okay, all right, so that's some of the general thing that you need to remember anytime you're quoting a source. All right, so we said that you never plunk your quotation into your essay, and you don't make it stand alone. You always have to integrate it seamlessly into your own writing, into your own sentence construction or structure. All right, so how do you do this? Okay, an example would be in mythologies, Roland Barthes illuminates the mythological power of wine in its capacity to serve as an alibi to dream as well as reality. It depends on the users of the myth. And of course, you have the parenthetical citation there, parenthetical documentation telling you that this quote comes appears on page 58 of the source, and of course the author's last name is not given in the parentheses because it's already given in the in-text citation. Okay. Alright, so as you can see, this is an example of a seamless integration of the source's words along with the writer's own words. Okay, the quotation begins here at the beginning of serve and after myth and ends after myth. All right, so let's see how it seamlessly fit into the writer's sentence structure. All right, so the writer's own words is from in mythologies, rolling bards illuminates the mythological power of wine in its capacity to. So the writer's own words end at to, and the quote picks up from there, but it has to pick up um, in the same grammatical to pick up with the same grammatical form that is needed to logically carry out the remaining sentence. All right, so if the writer's own word ends with to, right, and it seems that we need a verb here because it seems to is the beginning of an infinitive. An infinitive would be to act, to drink, to dance, to serve, whatever, right? Those are infinitive. All right, so if the writer's own word begins with a to, then we need a verb to carry on the grammatical structure, right? So the verb is serve, right? So for you to do this, you have to be aware of where your own word ends and what grammatical form it ends in, right? And what the part of speech is needed at the beginning of the quotation to carry on the grammatical structure of that essay. I'm sorry, of that sentence. Okay, if that makes sense. Alright, so the next is about altering quotations. You can't alter your quotation too much, right? You can only alter a certain word here and there, such as articles or pronouns, to make sense. And when you do that, your own alteration has to come in the bracket. But I'm not going to cover this extensively because it's a harder concept and you are not encouraged to do that until you become really, really comfortable with citing sources, and we are not there yet. All right, but also note that you can also omit certain phrases or clauses in a continuous quotation, right? So this is the continuous quotation that we're using with, right? This is from the beginning to end. And let's say that in your citation, you don't need all of the words in the same continuous quotation. Let's say that you can do away with as well as reality in this quote, right? So to indicate that you've omitted some words from dream to it in this continuous quotation, then you need to put a series of periods called the ellipsis to indicate to your reader that there are elided words or omitted words in between here. Okay, and this all goes back to writerly decisions that you have to make. I cannot tell you that you have to omit or whatever, but you need to be selective and you need to be aware of the significance of the entire quotation that you're using. Okay, do not be wasteful with your quotation. Only quote the part that are necessary, that are essential, that you want to use. Do not use quotation as space fillers. Okay, a lot of students do that. A lot of students just kind of indiscriminately plunk in a quotation just so their essay can be longer, and that is not wise. Alright, so we've just discussed short quotation, and you just integrate short quotation into your own sentence structure, right, with no kind of break in spacing or anything like that, okay? But with long quotation, the format is different, significantly different. And but let's define a long quotation. Long quotation, according to MLA style, are quotations that take up more than 4 lines in your own paper to represent. Okay, and I would also add that for my classes, I do also, MLA does not impose a maximum or a maximum limit, but I will impose a maximum limit. Your long quotation cannot exceed 10 lines in your paper, and even with 10 lines, it's still excessive. But for all courses, I am going to define long quotation as those that take up that take up more than 4 lines, but no more than 10 lines. If you go over 10 lines, I will start deducting points, okay? And you shouldn't even have to use all of that space if you are selective and aware of all the words and their in a quotation that you're using and their impact. Right, and you have to exercise your editing skill. You don't have to use everything. Alright, so when you are incorporating a long quotation into your essay, into your paper, you have to separate the quotation from the rest of the paragraph, even though it still belongs in the same paragraph. And what I mean is you have to block it off. Okay, so but of course the imperative to introduce your long quotation still stands. Just like with short quotation, you still gotta introduce it. You gotta contextualizing it by introducing it and give very, very brief background information to help with the understanding of the quotation. Same idea applies to long quotation. You have to also introduce it. All right, so before you give your long quotation, let's say in the paragraph here, you're talking, you're providing your supporting details, and then you want to cite a source, a long quotation from a source. Well, you begin by introducing the source. For example, in Warden, Henry David Thoreau in Warden, Henry David Thoreau articulates the motivation compelling his self-exile in the woods. Okay, so here we have a complete sentence introduction of the long quotation. We have the source, we have the author, and we have the rhetorical verb explaining what this passage does, what this quotation does. The quotation explains why Thoreau wants to go, why Thoreau went into the woods and lived by himself for a couple of years. Okay. So your introduction of your long quotation has to explain the context, okay, and the significance or the context of your quotation. Have to explain what it does, and it has to do so in a complete sentence such as this one. And then after you're done introducing your quotation, instead of ending your sentence with a period, you need to end it with a colon like this. And then even if you still have space here, after you introduce it with the colon, you have to hit enter on your keyboard and go down to the next line. And when you go down to the next line, you have to indent. You see how this entire long quotation is indented? Okay, so you have to indent the entire quotation, and notice also that you don't have quotation marks here at the beginning and at the end of the quotation, right? Because this is a block quotation, and when you're representing long quotation, you indent and block the entire thing like that, but you don't use quotation marks. Okay, so you block the entire thing, and then you come back here, and then you also need that parenthetical citation that tells you where this quote comes from in the source. And for example, and this is not factual or anything, but just for the sake of having something, I said that this quotation comes on page 61, right? And notice that that the author's last name does not precede the page number because you've already given the author's last name in your introduction of the quotation. Alright, so after you've given the quote and you've documented it this way, you need to hit the key enter again to go down to the next line, because remember I said that anytime you quote a source, no matter if it's a long quotation or a short quotation, you have to say something you have to give comment on the quotation, and your comments can be somewhere along the line of, explaining to your reader, what the quotation is essentially saying, what it signifies, how it's important, how does it highlight, illustrate, or support, the point that you're trying to make at this point in the paragraph in your essay, all of that stuff. So to do that, after you give your parenthetical citation, you hit the key button on your keyboard, the enter key on your keyboard to go down to the next line, and you don't indent, because remember, you have to keep in mind that all of this is still in one paragraph. You're still in the same paragraph. You have not started a new paragraph. Okay, so you have to act as if this is it is still in the same paragraph. It's just represented in the block style. Okay, so you take your cursor and you go back down to the left margin all the way to the end of that margin, and you just type. You just continue on in that paragraph, and you just type your explanation of the quotation, your comments on the quotation. So you just continue on with the paragraph, if that makes any sense. Okay, and it should. Alright, this part is about how to document your sources in your works cited page. Okay, so for your persuasive essay and your research paper, at the end of your essay, you will need a separate page, right? A separate page, its own entire page, a separate page, and you will entitle it Works Cited Page. I will have a sample of a Works Cited page posted in the module, so that you can see what it looks like. But this page lists all the sources, document all the sources that you've cited in your essay, right? And so the rest of this PowerPoint talks about gives you the format of the different types of sources, the documentation format of the different types of sources. So look through them. If you have a book, depending on what kind of book, how many author, if it's an edition book, then you just follow the format for your particular source. And most of you will probably use articles, and there are articles in a scholarly journal, article in a newspaper, article in a magazine, web publication, and so forth. Okay, so but chapter 28 in your textbook has a much more extensive list of examples to go by. So I highly encourage you to well, you are required to read through that chapter and look at the details of the examples provided for a better idea on how to document and format your sources. Okay, so but the one thing that I will say is, in MLA style, every mark, every punctuation count. Okay, so the comma counts where it needs to be, the period counts where it needs to be, italicizing count, quotation marks count. Okay, and also spacing does count. You have to indent. So let's say that in your works cited page, most of your sources, each of your if your source takes more than one line, such as this, to document, then you have to indent after the first line. Okay, the first line of the same source you don't indent, but if that same source requires multiple lines to be finished with its documentation, then you have to indent every line after the first line. Okay, so let's say, so this source right here takes 2 lines to document it entirely. The first line you don't indent, but the second line you do. Second line of the source documentation you do indent. Same thing with this example. So if you look through these examples in the examples in this PowerPoint, as well as the examples in your textbook, you'll see that that after the first line, that the lines after the first line in the same documentation, source documentation, are indented. So make sure you keep that in mind, because if you forget, points will be deducted. Okay, so like I said, every marks, every points, every punctuation, every space every spacing counts. So make sure that you are careful in your detailing of these of your documentation. Alright, so let's see what I need to discuss here. Okay, so please keep in mind about, being critical of the sources that you choose. There are different types of sources. Again, visit page 413 in your textbook and chapter 28. But chapter 28 specifically for MLA style, page 413, has that ranking of the different type of sources that you should find very, very useful to help you determine if the sources that you're looking at are trustworthy. Okay, and of course the most popular, the most trustworthy and deepest type of sources are your scholarly books and scholarly articles. Now, when you're conducting your research in Galileo, most of the databases in Galileo has filters, has result limiters or filters, and one of these filters is your scholarly peer review filters. So say if you only want sources, scholarly sources that are written by scholarly authors or academic authors working within an academic institution or belonging to an academic community. If you want only scholarly sources, then you can click on that filter that says peer reviewed, or scholarly article or scholarly sources or something along that line, to let the database know to only give you scholarly sources. And there are other filters or result limiters in Galileo, in the different databases of Galileo as well. So if you can use any of the result limiters or filters, then you should, if only to save you time, because you don't want to spend so much time kind of browsing through irrelevant sources. But while I have you here, let me just open up Galileo so that you see what I'm talking about, to kind of give you a brief overview of how to conduct research in Galileo. Okay, so as you can see, I am not being prompted to give my password because I am working on campus, right? So when you click on the website, the URL of Galileo, which is www.galileo.usg.edu, okay, you're taken to this home page, and you can browse by subject, browse by type, or browse by databases. Okay, so let's say you're browsing by databases because there's a database that you want to work in, and the database, let's say, is called Academic Search Complete, which is some of the most useful general databases that you can use as the starting point for your research. And as you want more specific type, subject specific type sources, then you can go to subject specific databases. But Academic Search Complete is a general database that contains pretty much information sources for all subjects. So that's always a good starting point. So it's still loading. Alrighty then. Alright. So you just type in your keywords. Okay, it's very important that before you begin researching, that you are able to kind of sit down and just briefly brainstorm, or generate as many relevant keywords or key phrases for your topic, because the more variety you have or variations on the same idea that you have, the more sources that you are likely to generate. Okay, so work them out. Try different methods, different phrasing, different terms, and so forth. All right, so you type in, let's say I am going to type in, religious symbolism in Flannery O'Connor. Oh, wait, hold on. I don't want, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to go back, because the whole point of me doing this is to show you how to use the result limiters or filters. Alright, so if you scroll down here, you'll see some of these result limiters or filters that I've just talked about. Up here, you can say Boolean phrase or phrase only, and your chapters 24, 25 should explain what that means. If you want to find all of your search terms or any or smart text or anything like that, apply equivalent subjects. Here, if you only want full text sources, because some databases do not contain full text versions of all their sources, right? But if you only want to look at what they have in full text, then you can click on that. You can impose a publication date limit. Say you only want to look at publications or sources published from a certain year up to a certain year, then you can do that as well. And if you only want to look at periodical or newspaper, these are publication or source type, you can pick one of those. Now, the scholarly peer-reviewed journals, which according to your table on page 413 is your most reliable source. Okay, so if you want only the scholarly peer review sources, then you click on that, and it will only generate full text scholarly sources or full text scholarly articles. And once you've applied all of the filters that you want to apply, then you can just click on search, and it should generate results according to the limits that you've set. Alright, so I think all databases in Galileo, not just Academic Search Complete, or most databases, allow you to apply these filters for your results. Okay, so make sure that you do that. And up here, now EBSCOhost is I guess it's a vendor that manages many of these databases that you'll probably be using. And so an EBSCOhost, if you're working within EBSCOhost databases, it does allow for you to create an account with it. And the value of creating an account with EBSCOhost databases is when you're researching in their databases, you are allowed to create folders to keep track of the sources that you are looking at. And so this is another great way to keep track of your sources that I talked about at the beginning of this lecture. The importance of doing that. You can save articles, you can create different folders to organize your articles for different classes, and so forth and so on. So please do explore that option. Okay, in that with EBSCOhost, any databases that has this logo and the name EBSCOhost somewhere, they know that you can do that in that database. Okay. All right. So good luck researching. Please be wise, be critical, evaluate your sources, and if you recall, one of the questions on your plagiarism quiz is about the danger or the risk of plagiarism. Is how the risk of plagiarism increases when students conduct research, and that's a huge concern for all instructors. And the reason being that students tend to Google everything and expose themselves to sources that may not be reliable, such as this unregulated web content on the World Wide Web, or that students can simply be stressed for time, or they simply don't want to put in the industriousness that it takes to cite a source and document sources appropriately, that will not run them the risk of that would not run the risk of plagiarizing the sources and stuff. So all of these takes works, and they can be tedious, but they are required. Okay, you are training to become an ethical academic writer, someone who has something valuable and meaningful to contribute to academic discourses. So you have to follow the rules that govern these conversations or these discourses. And one of those rules is using MLA style to refer to what other people have said, to build up on what other people have said, to distinguish your own intellectual property from other people's intellectual property, and all of those things, right? So all of these concepts are implicit in this idea of, citing and referencing and citing and documenting sources. Right, so if you have any questions hereafter, email me, and remember to give yourself enough time to do all of these critical components of your essay writing, um, as well as you can. Okay.